From the McCourtney Institute for Democracy at Penn State University, I'm Chris Beam.
I'm Candace Watts-Smith.
I'm Jenna Spinelli, and welcome to Democracy Works. This week, our guest is Desmond Meade, who is Executive Director of the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition, author of the books Let My People Vote, My Battle to Restore Civil Rights of Returning Citizens, and America's Disenfranchised, How Restoring Their Vote Can Save the Soul of Our Democracy. Desmond is also the recipient of the McCourtney Institute's 2021 Brown Democracy Medal. And Chris, we had the chance to meet him recently when he came to campus to accept the medal and present a lecture on his work.
Sometimes in doing these podcasts, we meet people who are just extraordinary people. And Desmond Meade is one of them. I mean, leave aside for a moment his really amazing work on the rights restoration in Florida, and just focus on him as a human being. You know, he was an addict, a felon, had not anything but the clothes on his back, and was, talks in the first book quite a bit about how he was just waiting for a train to come by so he could just end his life. And he didn't. And he checked himself into rehab, and then he started community college, and then he went to law school. And now he just won a MacArthur Genius Grant and had all his civil rights restored. It's just an amazing story. And it makes me think about how I react when I see homeless people. And it makes me think about how I react when I hear about someone's addiction. And, he really forces you to recognize that there's a human being there and an enormous amount of potential. And so that's kind of where I start with him. And then after all that, you have the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition that he leads, and which led to this really breakthrough moment in American history for the ex-felons in Florida.
I think what is so important about Desmond Meade's message is that we have to put the humanity back into the center of democracy. And he's really interested in improving democracy for everyone, despite your policy preferences, that everybody should get a say. And, just on that alone, Desmond Meade is a bigger person than I ever will be.
So I think it's just worth taking a second here to say that this doesn't come up directly in the interview, but Desmond was the leader of the Amendment 4 campaign in Florida, which was a ballot initiative in 2018 that restored voting rights to more than 1 million people in Florida that had prior felony convictions. We talk about how some of the things that the legislature has done in response to that, but just to kind of put that out there when we're talking about the gravity of Desmond's work and this coalition that he built to pass this initiative with broad support, something like 65% of the vote in what we know is a very divided state in many respects. And
I think there are two things that need to be pointed out. One, yes, 65% is I think that's right, and 65% in Florida, I think you'd have trouble getting that many to agree to the color of the sky, right? This is an amazing achievement. The other thing is that he's not talking about something that I think most people are just initially and immediately sympathetic to. I think most people say, well, these people were felons. That's part of the price of breaking the law. And, if they want to get it back, they have to go through all these hoops, because otherwise it's, this is something they deserve. Now, I'm not saying that everyone thinks that, but I think it is just a tough initiative to get passed under any circumstances and in any state. And yet Desmond Meade did it, and did it in Florida. And I think that is just, obviously he was the leader of this large coalition, and involved thousands of volunteers, but he was the leader. He was the face for this initiative, and it is just really an incredible achievement.
But one of the things that this kind of initiative does is to call into question our common sense around that, and also to help us remember where these policies came from in the first place. And felony disenfranchisement policies were not inevitable. They were enacted as a kind of way to get around what the Constitution allowed in regards to who could be banned from the ballot. And, they came up after Reconstruction was over in order to prevent, formerly enslaved people from voting. So, now over the century and a half, it has become common sense that policy has telegraphed the message that people who are in prison or formerly in prison don't deserve all of their rights. But it could have been different. And what we're seeing now in Florida, in California, in Virginia, in New York, in Iowa, in DC, is that people are starting to recognize that it could be different and it should be different. So, it's really, this is, I guess, one of the places where people see that we could expand the franchise. Mm-hmm. And people are grabbing on a hold to that. But also, I think he makes it really clear that when we take care of the least of us, we take care of everybody.
Yeah.
And, he says, if we can ensure the rights of the most marginalized people, that means that everyone is going to have more rights.
Well, I think that is a good place to transition to the interview. Let's hear from Desmond. Let's hear about some of these ideas about humanity and all of these things that we've just been discussing. Let's go now to the interview with Desmond Meade. Desmond Meade, welcome to Democracy Works. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me, Jenna. It's a pleasure being here.
So in reading over your new essay on America's disenfranchised, why restoring their vote can save the soul of our democracy, you start that off by talking about your process of threading the needle between law, criminal justice, and democracy. And I think a lot of people, just as you say, don't really think about the connection between the three of those things. So can you just start off by telling us how you threaded that needle or how you have threaded it over the course of your work with the Florida Rights Restoration Coalition?
Well, thank you for that question. I think that, it's probably more about finding that through line. I learned that when I was practicing for a TED Talk about what is that through line that connects so many different things. And I look at that through line as humanity, right? And so when, and it's causing me to really even just question about, how politicized we've made things, and that voting and democracy is actually less political than we make it out to be. And it's more about, I would say, like humanity, right? How we care, how we view each other, how do we care about each other, and what do we expect from each other as far as a society or a group of people that have made some type of assertion that we do want to live together, right? No one wants to be an island. And so when I was engaged in the work, at first it seemed it's all about just getting voting rights back to people who have previous felony convictions. But it was a much deeper conversation. When you go to criminal justice, it's all about getting criminals off the street or fighting crime or whatever. But no, it was a deeper discussion about how we're treating people and what like the type of things that we're making crimes, and then how we're punishing folks for so-called violating these laws or statutes that we created. And then how do we treat these people after they've served their time? And at the end of the day, with the people who we deal with as it relates to criminal justice are the same people who we're dealing with when it relates to felony disenfranchisement. And the problem was that we weren't looking at them as people first, right? We were looking at them as either criminals or ex-criminals and not as someone's father, someone's brother, sister, or mother, right? And not seeing the humanity in them. And then if we're able to see the humanity in individuals who commit crimes or people who are trying to have access to democracy, if we're able to look at them through the lens of them being human beings first and part of our society, then that changes our approach to implementing criminal justice policies. It changes our approach or our resistance in letting people vote. Because, I mean, there's even a debate now, even in the left, about whether or not people should be able to vote in prison, right? And the reality is that when you stop and think about it, people should never lose the right to vote. Right. Voting is like one of the clearest indicators of citizenship. And, you know, I think about like my sons. I have 4 sons. And anybody who has sons would tell you that they're going to do some type of boneheaded things at some point, and actually at multiple points, right? And there are times when you just want to grab them like, what the heck are you doing? What are you thinking? But at no point whatsoever do my sons stop being my sons. And I don't think that American citizens should ever lose citizenship because they made a mistake, right? But so there's still that debate about whether you should, vote in prison or should you wait till after you complete your sentence. At the end of the day, it's about how are we viewing these folks, and if we view these folks in light of them being a criminal or someone that's done something wrong and should not be a part of our society, that's kind of, I think it's different than, if we were to actually view them in a more personal way and look and really recognize their humanity and know that they are part of our family.
Right. So the other thing that's sort of tied up in all of this, in partisanship, in politics, in even what you were saying, the notion of humanity is the notion of power. And there's a certain dimension of voting, of politics, that is inextricably about power. Who has it, who doesn't, who gets it, who doesn't. So how have you grappled with that in your work and trying to balance power with humanity?
And the thing about what I believe, power is not partisan, right? And I say that because when I think about even when we talk about felon disenfranchisement, and we've seen that we've seen its resurgence in this country during the Reconstruction era. And it was specifically used as a tool to diminish the newfound political power of the newly released enslaved people in this country. During that time, my ancestors that were hung and murdered and bitten by dogs, that was being done by Dixie Democrats, And a lot of folks look at, now the whole situation was about stopping the newly freed people from being able to vote or have the political power. I looked at it as something deeper, and that was an affront against democracy. And so I think that our democracy is being attacked by both sides, right? Because at the end of the day, it's about who has that power, just like you said. And so how we approach diminishing that power, right, I think dictates that we have a clear understanding of who it is that's trying to get it. And if we think that we only need to look at the left or only need to look at the right, we're going to be off base, and we're never going to be able to diminish that, the power of the people who currently just really try to minimize who gets to participate and who don't. We see this in redistricting, right? That's something that's a big topic today because of, the balance of power in D.C., but redistricting has always been a tool that was used by both sides to select its voters, right? And that's something that's inherently wrong with the system because it feeds into this, I have power and I should use that power to minimize who else can get power.
Well, and that was also a key part of how you organize the Amendment 4 campaign, right? It wasn't necessarily about the outcome of which party is this going to benefit. It was about how is this going to help humanity, as you said earlier.
Yeah, it was a deeper goal. It wasn't about turning Florida blue. Like I tell folks, and I used to tell them, listen, we don't need another blue state or another red state. What we need is a united state, right? And, at the end of the day, we were fighting just as hard for that person that wanted to vote for Donald Trump as we were for the person who wished they could have voted for President Barack Obama. And so, because I do believe that if you're really a champion of democracy, then you're not going to be selective on who you're fighting for, right? And we're not just going to be fighting for people that look like us or think like us or people who we hope vote like us, right? And sadly, we do have pockets of people that do that. Their motivation for championing certain voting rights causes are based on their belief that if they're able to get these people their right to vote back, that it's going to mean more people on their side and they're going to get to advance their agenda. That is not advancing democracy. That's actually, I think, advancing tribalism or something of that nature. I do believe that, the true north is about really believing that our society becomes better, our democracy becomes more vibrant when more people participate, even if they disagree with us. And being willing to live with the fact that, there might be more people who believe something other than what I believe, and I'm still okay with that, right? What I should be happy about is that everybody had an opportunity to weigh in, and I think that's most important.
Our friends at Future Hindsight just launched their 16th season. It's a podcast we think you, Democracy Works listeners, will love because it is all about how to become more civically engaged. It's hosted by Mila Atmos, and it's a podcast that takes big ideas about civic life and democracy and turns them into action items that everyone can follow. Every Thursday, Mila shares her in-depth conversations with changemakers, and this season is all about the social contract. They'll be exploring questions around how we as a society live together, what we owe each other, what we ask of our governments, and what are the obligations of power. I know I'm interested to hear more, and if you're looking for more ways to get involved, this is definitely the podcast for you. Find Future Hindsight wherever you listen to podcasts. How have you shared that message with other people who are organizing campaigns, not just felon disenfranchisement, I guess in the broader world of what we think of as democracy reform or, voting rights reform? How does that message go over generally?
Sometimes some folks find it hard to digest, but the reality is I don't care what the issue is that you're working on, right? The thing is we politicize too many issues, right? It should not be a political question about whether or not a child deserves to have clean drinking water. That should not be a political question. And sometimes we are, we instigate the politicization of issues just by how we even launching, right? For instance, if there's a certain issue that you're passionate about and you want to change, and then you launch a campaign and you say, well, this is a progressive campaign about, why are you putting that label there? Right? Because the minute you came out saying that this was a progressive campaign, you already drew some lines. You already said, okay, we're going to war with conservatives. One of the things with our campaign was that people, constantly used to try to characterize our campaign as a bipartisan campaign. And I used to just really reject it. I was like, no, we're not. And they were like, okay, I'm sorry. What I meant was you have a nonpartisan campaign. And I would soundly reject that notion too. And I would tell them that what we have, or what we were, was an organic grassroots movement that welcomed and enjoyed bipartisan support. And the difference is that we didn't lead with the politics, we led with the people, right? And that's advice I give a lot of different activists or organizations, right? Is that don't try so hard to lead with the politics, especially when the issues that we're talking about are basic human right issues. Because once you lead with the politics, then you automatically limit who you can talk to or who can engage in conversations with you about it. And so you have to cast a much broader net, right? And then you're able to bring in conservatives, you're able to bring in independents that would much rather have a conversation about human rights than political ideology.
So there's also, I think, wrapped up in this, and you, I think, heard this in your work on the campaign, this notion of, oh, my vote doesn't matter. And that's, I mean, putting aside the question of disenfranchisement, I think even for people who can vote, there's this sense that my vote isn't going to count for anything. So how did you combat some of those types of messages as you were out trying to garner support for your amendment?
Well, prior to launching the amendment, I was engaged in a lot of GOTV and voter registration efforts in Florida. And I used to hear that a lot. And what surprised me, because typically they'll tell you, don't argue with people, just keep it going because you're trying to meet your quotas. But I just couldn't, I couldn't follow those orders. And one day I just decided to go back and engage a person that just told me that, their vote didn't count or didn't matter. And by the second question, I was able to determine that person couldn't even vote to begin with, right? And what I found was that a lot of those messages around not voting were coming from people who either thought that they could not vote or legitimately could not actually vote because of a prior felony conviction. And, I instantly related to them, because, when I was released from prison and someone approached me about voting and I knew I couldn't vote, it was like a slap in the face, reminding me that I'm not part of society again. And that's very hurtful because, deep down inside, we do want to be a part of something, right? We want to be loved and we want to be able to love. And to be reminded that, listen, you're no good, that you're not a part of our group, and you'll never be a part of our group, is so hurtful that we would actually suppress that hurt by masking it with an indifference, right? And so when something bothers us, what we do is that we diminish the value of the thing that bothers us. And so what I was seeing was people talking about their vote didn't matter. It didn't matter who got in office and all that, to hide or mask the fact that, or the pain from not being a part of something. And then those other folks, I would run into, one of the things I would really get them with is, listen, if your vote didn't matter, then why are people trying so hard and using so many resources to stop you from voting? So obviously there's some value in that, right? That, you may have something in your home and you might think it's worthless, but everybody that comes to your house is offering to buy it off of your hand. You're going to start trying to wonder, why is this thing so valuable? And you're going to do your research, and then you eventually discover what gives that thing value. And what gives your vote value is that it does have the power to change things. I tell people that the voting booth is the ultimate equalizer in our democracy, because no matter how rich you are, you have just as much power as Bill Gates, and you have just as much power as the President of the United States, because it's one person, one vote. And when we use it, especially collectively, we see good things happen.
Mm-hmm. Right. And on that point about keeping that fight alive, I know that the Florida legislature has made it seemingly as hard as they could for everyone whose rights you fought for with the amendment to actually exercise that right to vote, adding fines and perhaps other things. Give us an update on where things stand now and how your organization is coming up with solutions to help the folks that you serve.
Yeah, so we know after we passed Amendment 4, which I have to say was a beautiful moment. One of the things I loved most about passing of Amendment 4 was that we were able to bring together people from all walks of life, all political persuasions, to actually pass this amendment. You know, over 1 million people who voted for Amendment 4 were Republicans. And we actually had 1 million more votes than any candidate that ran for governor. But the most beautiful part about that was those 5.1 million people who voted for Amendment 4. I looked at those votes, and I didn't see votes that was based on hate or fear. Rather, I seen votes that was based on love, forgiveness, and redemption. And I believe we showed the world that love can, in fact, win the day, that we don't have to tear each other down, demonize each other in order to advance some sound policy reforms, right? But immediately after that beautiful moment, the legislature got involved, and anytime you bring politics into something, it becomes ugly. And they basically determined that they had the arrogance to believe that only politicians or only these state officials had the wherewithal to know how to properly implement Amendment 4, and they came up with statute that basically required the payment of fines and fees before a person would be able to register to vote. Our response to that was not to engage with these folks on a political level, but to seek a much higher, more high ground. And our approach was, listen, let's take this obstacle and turn it into an opportunity. We were able to raise over $27 million from over 90,000 people throughout the country and help people pay off their fines and fees. Because, at its core, we believe that, no one should ever be forced to choose between putting food on their table or being able to vote, right? And while raising this money, something incredible happened, right? Not only were we able to expand democracy to a lot of people in Florida, but the process in doing so made our organization the largest contributor to Florida's economy from a nonprofit organization, where we infused over $27 million into Florida's economy, which ended up not only creating a more inclusive democracy, but we were saving people's jobs, right? There were people who worked for the court systems and public defenders who were getting ready to get laid off or furloughed because of the impact of the COVID pandemic. But because of our efforts, they were able to maintain their jobs. We were able to save taxpayers' dollars. And to me, that created a much impactful narrative, because the very same people who were once the most despised in that state happened to be the people that was the biggest champions of that state during the COVID pandemic. So we saved people's jobs, taxpayers' dollars. We distributed over 1 million masks throughout the state in different prisons and jails and homeless shelters and supervisor of elections office. Over 500,000 ounces of sanitizers that we were able to distribute, and I'm talking from Key West to Pensacola and all points in between. And there's no other organization that stepped up like that in Florida. And it helped shift the narrative, and it helped show two things. Number one, that when we fight for the lowest among us, right, everybody benefits from that. And it also shows that we're not these monsters that previous narratives would make us out to be, that we are human beings, that we are part of society, and we want to contribute to society. Trust me, the overwhelming majority of people with felony convictions are not, when they were kids, they were like, when I grow up, I want to be a criminal or whatever. And even after they've been incarcerated, we're not in jail or prison saying, man, I can't wait to get out so I can go back to prison, right? That we're regular human beings, that we have dreams and desires, and we want to, be able to enjoy life, liberty, and happiness, and be able to pursue happiness. And it showed the humanity in us, and showed that, yes, we can be contributing members of society. And so that was a moment that was created because the legislature wanted to create obstacles, and we were not going to let that deter us.
Such a positive message. And I think that, a lot of people working in various aspects of politics could take a lesson from that about, turning obstacles into opportunities. Well, I think that is a perfect place to end things. Desmond Meade, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Jenna.
All right, so I think that interview is confirmation to you that this is a human being worth listening to. I wanted to just start by talking about what he said about how this moment when the Amendment 4 passed, and passed so resoundingly, and what a moment of triumph and celebration that was. And then almost immediately, the Florida legislature came in and said, well, fine, you can get the right to vote, but you have to pay back all the fees and fines. And so even hundreds of dollars is a bridge too far. But they said, yeah, go ahead. As soon as you get all this paid off, then you'll get your rights back. And so, there's something fundamentally disheartening about that. However, Desmond immediately goes to the fact that people all over the nation, and I think all over the world, donated to a fund that the FRRC created to pay back these fines. And after whatever it is, a couple years, they've collected $27 million. Now, I could, and I actually do, have this very cynical reaction that this, allows the legislature to have their cake and eat it too. On the one hand, they're saying they're keeping these people off the rolls who they're worried are going to vote Democratic, and if they do get in, the only way they get in is to get free money into the state coffers, and $27 million is not nothing. And so. There is this, that is evidence to me of this pretty basic question I have about my own innate cynicism about the political process and about political players, and his basic political strategy of appealing to our common humanity.
So, two things. One, I think that we have to keep in mind that, talk about love and humanity. I do, on its surface, it seems like kind of whimsical, but, Martin Luther King Jr. was also in that camp. And he talked about loving your common citizen and doing the right thing for humanity. But I think maybe on a more kind of nuts and bolts level, is that we also need to keep in mind that, democracy has several components. One is voting, and then, we have elites. And what Mr. Meade was able to bring together is voters, regular citizens who wanted to do something different. And then we have elites. And our, the way that our democracy runs, so-called democracy runs, I guess, is with a lot of institutional mechanisms that serves to exclude people like Desmond Meade from coming to the forefront as political candidates and as political representatives. And so some of the things I'm thinking about are campaign finance, which he talks about, gerrymandering, even just the ability to get third parties on the ballot. And so we might have a different set of representatives in state legislators and in Congress if we had a different set of rules. So I hear what you're saying, Chris, but I also think it's important for us to keep in mind that there are millions of citizens who would have it be different if we had a different system, if we had a better system of accountability.
Yeah, I mean, this is an argument that you and I have had before, that, you are a lot more hopeful about the ability of the people to overrun the entrenched interests of the elite. And, I hope you're right.
But Amendment 4 shows that.
I understand that.
DeSantis won by only 18,000 votes.
Mm-hmm.
Amendment 4 won by like 1 million.
Right. No, I get it.
The people did what they were supposed to do.
Yep.
They did the right thing.
No, absolutely. And this was a voter initiative, right? And so it's only, in states where there is the opportunity for voter initiatives, this is the kind of thing that can happen. I think it's harder to come up with agreement on, like, I don't know, ranked choice voting or something, but anything's possible. But what I would want to not lose sight of, I guess, is there's not a person like us who focuses on politics in the United States right now who isn't concerned about polarization, negative partisanship, tribalism. Mm-hmm. And everybody comes up with these ways of addressing it. And his argument at bottom is it is a strategy for addressing that problem. And his strategy is to cut it off at the knees, mm-hmm. and to say, you are not a Republican or a Democrat. You are a human being just like me. And if you see your identity as being caught up or overwhelmed by partisanship, then that's not just bad, it's inaccurate. You are more than that, as am I. And that which unites us, our humanity, is far more important than this. And again, my first reaction is, oh, come on. That's not going to work. But it did work. It did work. And so, I have to take that seriously.
Yeah, he reminds me a lot of like William Barber, right?
Yes.
Let's bring morality back,
mm-hmm.
into politics, and let's do the right thing, and, not like the partisan thing. He pushes us to think about who should be able to vote, and why do we think that some people are more worthy than others? Yeah, I mean, so again, it seems like we have these rigid ideas about the things that, the voting age used to be 21, mm-hmm. and now it's 18. It could be something different. It used to be that non-citizen males, but citizen women had different voting rights, and now that's flipped. So none of the things that we do concerning voting are inevitable. And that, on some level, we do have to kind of think through, well, who should be able to, and who should have a say, who should be belonging in our society. And, I think that one of the things that he points out is voting is a cornerstone of belonging, mm-hmm. in society. So I'm really, at the beginning of this episode, we were trying to take a bet on how long it would take us to get to the dark side. I just don't think I can do it today.
I really kind of there's a little part of me that wants to disagree with you, Candace. I really do just want to say, this is nonsense. This is never going to work, blah, 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 blah. But I can't. So I'm not going to. I'm going to stop fighting it. I'm on the peace train. So thanks again to Desmond for his trip to Happy Valley and for all his work. Thanks to Jennifer for a great interview. I'm Chris Beam.
I'm Candace Watts-Smith for Democracy Works. Thanks for listening.
Democracy Works is a collaboration between the McCourtney Institute for Democracy at Penn State and WPSU, Central Pennsylvania's NPR station. Andy Grant is our producer, and our editors are Jen Bortz, Chris Kugler, and Mark Stitzer. Editorial review by Emily Reddy. If you liked what you heard today, please consider leaving us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts. It helps other people find the show. Democracy Works is a proud member of the Democracy Group, a network of podcasts focused on democracy, civic engagement, and civil discourse. Learn more at democracygroup.org.
Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next week.